Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. Yes, I actually found a little bit of time at the end of March because the next week is just going to be crazy for me. So, this is probably my last stream in like the next 10 to 14 days. It really depends. But we actually have a plethora of news and rumors to talk about, specifically rumors, and specifically from our resident tech Jesus, Apple predictor extraordinaire, Mark Gurman from Bloomberg. So, this is what the stream is going to be focused on today. We have covered a lot of these products in the past in their initial rumoring, if you will. But now we have a lot more detail, a more concrete timeline, and if this actually ends up being fully correct, then I'm really, really excited for the future of the iPad, the Mac, all those non-iPhone categories that, in my opinion, tend to get a little bit too little attention. And on this channel, we actually really like focusing on the latest M series processors, the latest technologies inside iPads, be it iPad Pro Tandem OLED screens or the Apple Pencil Pro, right? So I think it's very important, given the kind of community we have created here, to cover all this stuff. And once again, thank you to anyone who joins, who finds these streams afterwards. Please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, share the video out with anybody who you think might enjoy it, and comment. You guys know I love interacting with a lively comment section. We already have a sign of direct support. Max leaving a message saying, "Glad to see you found time. Have a good stream." Well, a thumbs up to you, buddy. Thank you so much for the €2.49. You can leave a super chat or a super sticker, just like Max did. You can also become a direct supporter right here on YouTube as a channel member. Shout out to Max again, Angelica, and Steve, who are MacCheck Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube. And you can also become a supporter over on Patreon. We have a few different tiers there, including a free one, so you can just use it to communicate. And a small amount of housekeeping. I did fully leave Twitter, so Blue Sky is going to be the only way to interact with me, like, really directly. Yeah, of course, I know Patreon helps too, but I understand that it's easier for you guys to join something like Blue Sky rather than Patreon. Of course, I'm still on Threads and stuff like that, but I'm very rarely actually on there. So you might find the links to those social media sites in the description of this channel, but please consider going to Blue Sky. I'm leaving all Musk-infested services behind me. Hard to believe that back in the day I actually paid for the Twitter Premium and shit like that, but this is completely behind me. Wasn't good for my mental health, wasn't good for my time management schedule. I spent far less time on Blue Sky. It's primarily to interact with tech news like these. So if you want to find and interact with me this way, then Blue Sky is the way to go. With all of this out of the way, let's get started, because we actually have quite a few different pieces of news and information, and there's a lot that I want to give my opinion on. And yeah, you guys, of course, feel free to do the same. Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with, what you are actually excited for, what you might be considering purchasing yourself. So at first, I would like to start with something very, very basic, and that is actually that we are expecting a new iPad Pro and a new MacBook Pro this year. Both should be powered by the M5 generation of processors. M5, of course, largely still rumored to come on TSMC's N3P node, so being their last major revision of their FinFET node families. The last 3nm node, I know technically there are always like X variants, but like, let's be honest. After N3P, we are getting 2nm finally. And so while there was prediction that we might get M5 or maybe even like an A19 processor based on 2nm, for now it looks more likely that both the iPhone, the iPad, and the Mac, which would mean both, all three, would be powered by 3 nanometer processors. Of course, the M5 is supposedly benefiting from TSMC's SoIC packaging technology. Whether or not that means M5 Pro and M5 Max become chiplet-based solution similar to what we have seen from AMD, what that means for efficiency, what that means for performance scaling, what that means for the overall die size that Apple is going to invest in those chips. Like my biggest hope for a chiplet design is not actually like raw performance like per core in any way, right? In fact, if anything, I would expect that to be a little bit down because there wouldn't be as much quite shared cache and shit like that. But my expectation would be that we could have a much larger GPU specifically on the Max processors because we see like with the release of the RTX 5090 laptop, before that the 4090 laptop, that just having a huge die, I mean, sure, it results in consuming 3 times more energy than the M4 Max, but it also comes with roughly 80% more GPU performance than the M4 Max. So if Apple wants to have any chance of meeting or exceeding that, or let's even say get close enough so that their efficiency advantages are just so relevant that people will be like, oh my God, why would I spend potentially more money on a louder device with worse battery life, right? If I could get this MacBook with now 50 or 60 GPU cores, and it's almost as good as that one in peak performance while being way better when on battery, and especially actually usable without like ramping up its fans, being too heavy. So it will be a very interesting chip generation, to say the least, especially as we also then transition from M5 right away to M6, which is largely rumored to be then Apple's first 2 nanometer based processors. So it's going to be interesting how much we're going to see from the improvements of the raw process node and how much we're going to see in architectural changes. Whether or not Apple adopts even faster memory anytime soon, like from 8533 memory, maybe up to 10,700 megatransfers memory. So plenty to consider, but unfortunately we are not getting all the details on this right now. Riveting Tail Chips joining the chat saying, is that my good man Mark? Yes, my good sir. I did find some time. I know you guys have been a little bit shocked when I, from one day to the other, just quit my Twitter entirely. So thank you still for finding the streams. I know it's gonna impact a little bit my live viewership and how many comments we get. So please bear with me. It's a transitioning phase as we fully adopt. Like, guys, if you like Musk, you probably won't like this channel. And shit like that. Riveting Tail Chap, I hope you're doing well, my good sir. Yes, I actually am. I have a lot of work and I have family stuff to deal with. Nothing negative, just stuff to deal with. So I have very little time, unfortunately, but I'm still very glad to find at least like, you know, an hour and a half here or there, maybe once or twice every 2 or 3 weeks. And then hopefully sometime end of April, I'll actually be back, right? I will not go back to the 3 times a week schedule I had in the past. My work has shifted entirely in that regard, but maybe like 2 streams a week, maybe one on the weekends, depending a little bit on how I manage my time schedule. Yeah, but thank you to anyone who still finds the streams, who comments, who likes, who shares, who subscribes. It's all very much appreciated. And of course, if you leave a direct support donation like Max did, that gets reinvested right back in the channel. So let's get back to the most basic piece of news we're covering today. We are expecting new iPads and MacBook Pros this year with M5 processors. Makes perfect sense, lines up with, of course, the M4 MacBook Air launching, the M4 iPad Pro launching last year in the summer. right, early summer, late May, and then the M4 MacBook Pro launching in November. But then if you consider a 12-month upgrade schedule that we now have these days for the Mac, and a roughly 18-month schedule for the iPad, that should bring them together to around an October-November launch based together on the M5. And Riveting Tail Chap, being an awesome dude, as we all know he is, leaving a $5 super chat saying, just wanted to send you some appreciation for all the work you do and knowledge you share, man. That's so appreciated, man. Thank you very, very much. I know it's always like, I know I would be having a lot more success if I created a very regular streaming schedule here, right? If I went to all the social media. But I do this as a hobby. I love each and every one of you as like really as a deeply committed like member of the community. So I just cannot explain to you how much it means to me. And it's not the money. It's not even just that you watch me. It's the fact that you are willing to experience this with me, to share this information, to learn together, to grow together even in a way. I know that some of my opinions have shifted after certain contributions from you guys. I know I've changed some of your minds occasionally. And Rosa also joining the chat saying hi and not correctly spelling my name for today with a C. Thank you so much. So let's actually continue with this. Of course, all of this is coming from Power On's Bloomberg's Mark Gurman. He says that the new iPad Pro models have progressed to an advanced testing stage, which would make sense. That leaves roughly like half a year to 9 months of refinement. That could make the iPad an October launch, which if you actually consider like, I mean, Apple these days like keeps the September right for the iPhone and the Apple Watch, the occasional iPod, AirPods reveal, right? But when you look at the actual iPad, because of its more irregular schedule, it happens that sometimes the iPad is revealed alongside the iPhone, but most often not. So if you were to ask me to predict exactly when it's going to happen, I would say it might launch just alongside the next MacBook Pro. And if it is a roughly October-November release, I could see them like having a multi-week like upgrade like roadmap, where on 1 week they announce the new iPad Pro, on the other week they announce the new MacBook Pro, right? They don't make a big fuss out of it. No new events. Like there's no like hyper new technology inside here. But I do expect, and I've been actually very happy with Apple's small press releases. I think they're done pretty well. I think it takes away a lot of the hyperbole that is associated with an actual Apple keynote. And I think for smaller release, it makes the release much more healthy if Apple isn't on stage like holding up the A16 basic iPad and saying it's the best thing since sliced bread, even though they couldn't even be bothered to make it compatible with the latest Apple Pencils, right? So again, I know a lot of people want the full return to like fully live keynotes. They also want more presentations, less press releases. You can let me know what you think in that regard. I personally am pretty happy with the current presentation style, unless, like, I don't know, once Tim Cook moves away from the CEO position and maybe like, I don't know, somebody like John Turnus takes over and we find out he actually has great charisma in a live presentation, because right now we have only seen him in pre-recorded stuff, then yeah, feel free to return to it. But right now, I don't really see that much reason to do that. I think a lot of people tend to look at big companies too much as like friends or even like acquaintances, where you're trying to like evaluate almost like their psychological situation, and you are like, oh, Apple will be so much better if they do live events. And I'm like, why? It's only the press there anyway. It's not like they're gonna invite you. And the only event that is actually still live, except for of course the major keynote, is DubDub. And DubDub is where Apple invites thousands of developers to join, to interact from all over the world. Yeah, this is a small side tangent, but I really wanted to get this off my chest. Let's actually continue with the real piece of news. So, of course, we got a thinner and lighter iPad Pro in last May. We got Apple's first generation Tandem OLED screen, which greatly improved efficiency, gave us up to 1,000 nits of peak all-screen brightness, which even the mini LED screens before that maxed out at 600 nits of SDR brightness, but they still are similarly capped at 1,600 nits for HDR. Of course, it supported the Apple Pencil Pro, which migrated also to the latest iPad Airs and the iPad Mini, but not in a funny way, the A16 iPad, which I just mentioned before. And of course, we just got the M4 MacBook Pro, and even more, we just got them even more lately was the M4 MacBook Air. So having both of those products be updated this year, later this year, makes perfect sense to me. I do not expect any big price changes, either to the positive or to the negative. We'll have to see how tariffs play out. I know a lot of you are in the United States. I'm guessing Riveting Tail Chap with his $5 USD donation. I know some of you come from Europe. Max with his €2.49 donation. So yeah, leave me more super chats, guys, in all kinds of currencies. Then that's very important data for me, believe me. Yeah, but so very small upgrades relatively. I would expect maybe a switch to Wi-Fi 7. Whether or not it actually means much faster Wi-Fi 7 or they just adopt Apple's first generation Wi-Fi modem remains to be seen. But this is a rumor that we have for the upcoming iPhone 17 generation. So I wouldn't be surprised if why wouldn't the iPad get a modem that is potentially cheaper for Apple to make and makes a lot of sense to just give it to every product in the lineup just so that Apple can benefit more from economies of scale. Now, it could be that the first generation Wi-Fi modem from Apple might not be good enough for these kinds of big products, but given that it's targeting Wi-Fi 7, I would honestly be surprised, because even if it's maxes out at the same 2.4 gigabits per second downloads as Apple's current Wi-Fi 6E modems, well, that still gives you just better support for newer routers, even if it doesn't give you better peak speeds. And I wouldn't even be surprised if we get at least slightly faster peak downloads. Plus, Apple's own modems, as we have seen from the C1, seem to really focus on efficiency. So if they're providing even half the benefits, right, with the C1 being roughly 25% more efficient than the X71 modem that Apple uses in their iPhones right now, if the new Wi-Fi modem is even half as efficient gen to gen, let's say a 10 to 12% efficiency increase over the current Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7 modems, then yeah, why wouldn't Apple do that? But this is not something, unfortunately, that Mark Gurman is covering here. He's just saying we're getting pretty small upgrades for both iPad Pro and MacBook Pro, both powered now by the M5 generation of processors. That, of course, still leaves us some iPads. Mark Gurman briefly mentions the fact that we are getting an iPad 12, which if you consider the A16 iPad, the iPad 11th generation, and he's saying it's basically getting a new processor. So there's nothing too crazy here. Exact timelines for other products are not quite as well provided, but we'll get to that later on. But of course, we are getting bigger stuff than that. With the iPad, we are supposedly getting an M6 powered iPad sometime in 2027, most likely in the first half, right? Remember the 18-month upgrade schedule that I just mentioned. If we get an October release M5 iPad Pro, that would roughly leave us with a March to June M6 iPad Pro, so that makes perfect sense. Of course, 18 months is never quite perfect. Sometimes it's 16, sometimes it's 20. So sometimes it's just 12 months. So who knows? But according to Mark Gurman, Apple is working with iPad Pros with Apple's in-house 5G modems. This is very important because we know that Apple apparently currently does not deem the C1 ready for their most premium products. It's more of an energy saver rather than like a premium differentiator. And apparently that by 2027, Apple plans to have their modems at a quality level that they would be worth including in iPad Pros, iPhone Pros, and who knows? In the past, we have heard rumors that the switch to in-house modems and the reduced cost that it brings and the better vertical integration could result in us getting 5G MacBooks as well. But that's more speculative on my part right now. So, in his Power On newsletter, Gurman said that Apple is already in the early stages of developing iPad Pro with an M6 chip. That makes perfect sense. High-end hardware takes 24, 36, sometimes longer in the oven. You refine the hardware, of course. You test it. You create software, especially stuff for like a new modem that might need new drivers and everything like that. Of course, a new modem might also be a new incentive for a new antenna design. So yeah, the fact that Apple is already working on an M6 iPad Pro is not surprising even slightly. But apparently this M6 iPad will come with an Apple designed 5G modem. We're getting an entry-level iPad 12 with a newer chip, and Apple is also working with on MacBook Air models with an M5 processor. Now, none of that is surprising. I do believe that while Apple will upgrade the chip in the entry-level iPad 12, I also believe that the main change will finally be a redesigned Apple Pencil attachment mechanism, because unfortunately, they kept the bad Apple Pencil design from the iPad 10th generation. And I also believe that by the time the iPad 12 comes out, the argument that Apple wants to upsell you on an iPad Air or hell, even an iPad Pro, just so you can get an Apple Pencil Pro, I don't think it will make too much sense. At that point, Apple is better off maybe sacrificing a few iPad Air sales and people buying iPad 12s instead, but then selling way more Apple Pencil Pros, right? At some point, the excitement for that accessory will just wane, they will have oversupply, and they will need more products that actually support it. So that's my speculation, but at least Gurman right now only mentions a newer chip. A MacBook Air with an M5 processor also makes perfect sense. I would expect it to launch probably next March. Apple has been on a pretty regular upgrade schedule, both for the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air now. Apple is currently aiming to release the iPad Pro models with its own 5G modem in 2027. Now, they're calling this the C2 modem. I would put one question mark on that. Now, I even said C2 in my video title, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is a C3, right? I mean, consider that we just got the iPhone 16e with the C1. Let's say Apple actually, it might target an annual upgrade schedule for their C modems, right? At that point, we would get a C2, maybe with the iPhone 17e. Right? And then maybe the iPhone 18e introduces the C3 next February or something like that. And then the iPad that launches 2-3 months later could come with also with a C3. Now, there's also a question, will Apple at some point differentiate their modems as they do their A and M series processors? I could see that. Could Apple potentially launch the iPhone 18e with a C3, but then the next iPad with a C2 Pro or something like that? That could also happen, but I'm just trying to tell you, Apple's silicon upgrades have been incredibly regular and incredibly how do I put it in a nice way that doesn't make me sound too superlative? But I would argue they over deliver in comparison to the rest of the industry. Like when you look, for example, at the RTX 5000 series versus the RTX 4000 series, that's an over 2 year gap. And to get an actual meaningful performance increase from one gen to the other, you're paying almost like the percentage of performance increase in extra money. And that was before we got tariffs, right? When you look at Zen 5 versus Zen 4, that's also a 2 year upgrade. And yes, you're getting some nice improvements on the X3D parts, but on the rest of the lineup, you're barely getting any efficiency gains. And again, we can also be talking about like, oh, 2 years, right? They're still on the same node. But like, don't forget, there was 3 nanometer available for both RTX 5000 and Zen 5. They just didn't because they wanted to save cost. And I recently looked at the video from Moore's Law is Dead, who is a pretty big PC parts leaker, and he talked about how Zen 6 is gonna jump from 4 nanometer, not even to 2 nanometer like A20, but actually gonna jump to N2X, right? So they're gonna jump all the way from 4 nanometer to a second generation 2 nanometer node in the second half of 2026. And I'm like, what? How? How is Apple only getting TSMC 2 nanometer next year, but AMD, who is notorious for staying at least half a generation behind Apple, is supposedly getting N2X, a year newer generation, on a product that's launching potentially earlier than the iPhone 18? So yeah, the rumor world is crazy. I always try to give you like very elaborate predictions, like for example, saying maybe it's not a C2, maybe it's a C3, right? But I never try to overexcite you. I never try to just pick sources that just say the best thing. I know we on this channel have like a running joke about my excitement for 2 nanometer and my hope that Apple would adopt 2 nanometer rather than N3P this year. But that is genuine excitement, and it's also based on a genuine TSMC roadmap, right? If Apple delayed the iPhone 17 Pro launch to like November, which has its precedent, that is what happened with the iPhone 12 series, then Apple could, in my opinion, launch it on 2 nanometer. Now, not anymore. Obviously, if they have already validated the A19 processor to be N3P, they will not be able to like upgrade it to 2 nanometer in just 6 months from now. I fully understand that, but I'm just trying to tell you, this is how I cover leaks and rumors. I don't try to overexcite you. I don't try to lie to you, but I do get sometimes a little bit carried away. Sometimes I am too excited, and in that case, I always like listening to your feedback. Let me know if you agree with my excitement, disagree, whether or not you think I should maybe pivot away to something else. So thank you so much for indulging me in that way. Of course, Apple's first C1 modem debuted in the iPhone 16e last month. They also bring up the iPad Pro's roughly 18-month upgrade schedule, which again should also give them some food for thought whether or not the new iPad Pro would be ready to receive a C3 modem. But what this also suggests to me is that the upcoming M5 iPad Pro, which we have discussed, will not have, of course, a C1 or C1 Pro or an early C2, right? And Apple is only gonna upgrade the iPads to in-house modems by 2027. What that means for the future of Macs, I don't know. Like, I mean, conceivably, that means that at least the M7 MacBook Pro could be ready for a C3 modem at the end of 2027, right? In my opinion, if you make the M6 a relatively big upgrade, and that's our next piece of news and rumors, I think that if you want to make the M7 also pretty exciting, combining it with the first ever MacBook that has 5G included sounds pretty exciting to me. So let's actually look at what we are supposedly getting from the new MacBook Pro. In fact, now we are talking, of course, the M6 MacBook Pro, which we just covered the M5, supposedly a small upgrade, no design changes, basically a chip swap, maybe a few other changes that I mentioned, like a newer Wi-Fi technology. But of course, the iPad coming out next year is the really big deal. It is Apple's first MacBook Pro redesign since the MacBook Pro in late 2021. That's the one that I have. That's Apple's first, like, truly Apple Silicon MacBook Pro, right? This is where they introduced the M1 Pro, the M1 Max variants of processors. Of course, now they are on a pretty regular schedule in giving us new versions of those MacBooks and those new processors. We have stayed on the mini LED screen technology on those MacBooks ever since late 2021. Apple just improved it, actually pretty greatly improved it on the M4 MacBook Pro. They gave it a quantum dot panel with faster response times, pixel response times, still maintaining 120 hertz, but now being much smoother to the eye and maxing out at 1,000 nits of brightness without using any hacks like the Vivid app or like what I use, which is better display. So pretty interesting. But of course, we do have Apple's creme de la creme of screen technologies, which is two-stack Tandem OLED, which Apple introduced last May on the M4 iPad Pro, helped make the iPad thinner, lighter, actually gave it longer battery life. It's a phenomenal upgrade in screen technology, and it even got all of those new features while getting a higher peak brightness, as I mentioned, at 1,000 nits of SDR brightness rather than 600 nits. So supposedly the new MacBook Pro, or the next MacBook Pro after the next MacBook Pro in 2026, is going to get that Tandem OLED technology. Of course, it would still maintain ProMotion. I would most likely expect it to roughly max out at the same peak SDR brightness of around 1,000 nits, but mainly it would deliver better contrast ratio, even deeper colors, of course, way deeper blacks, like perfect blacks, pixel level control, which also gives you far faster pixel response times, right? That's something that mini LED especially suffers with, and higher efficiency as well. At least if you are like using if you're looking at a lot of screens that involve a lot of black, and I know a lot of you love running your life in dark and night mode on your screen, so for most of us, it will be an improvement in battery life as well. The OLED MacBook Air, in contrast, now this is coming from DLEC, is expected to get a standard single-stack display rather than the more sophisticated two-stack tandem displays. That makes sense. Tandem OLED is more expensive. It also delivers benefits, so this is actually almost perfect product differentiation. Now, whether or not that means Apple finally gives us promotion on non-Pro products, the way we are getting finally promotion on the non-Pro iPhone 17 models, remains to be seen. I mean, when you consider it, if the 2026 iPad Pro is getting Tandem OLED, sorry, bless me, I guess. I wouldn't be surprised if like that MacBook Air, like if it launches like half a year or so afterwards, right? I mean, if it has a standard OLED screen, that's a nice improvement. And if it maxes out at 600 nits and shit like that, that's all great. But if it's not ProMotion, it's just gonna look weird. I mean, consider ProMotion now dates back to the 2017 iPads with Apple's first generation LTPO LCD panels. So by 2027, like a full decade afterwards, I really expect a 1,000 or even more expensive MacBook Air to have this. But yeah. So the explanation here is simple. Single stack displays have one red, green, and blue layer, with two stack random OLED has a second RGB layer. So this is actually something that I've seen people really comment on, because a lot of TV manufacturers started talking about tandem screens, right? But they don't usually have this exact setup that Apple has. They put their subpixels behind each other, right? But not have actually two fully featured panels almost behind each other. So while we do get tandem technology, one on top of the other on top of the other, in fact, we now have four stack tandems, because we have like the red, green, and blue subpixels, and I believe we have two blue subpixels on the latest LG G5 televisions. This is not quite the same technology. So whenever you see Tandem OLED out there, please consider that it's most likely not the exact technology that Apple uses. Right now, nobody but Apple uses this specific technology. It's not because it's so unheard of, but it's actually pretty expensive. It doesn't scale to super huge sizes. So that basically leaves Apple with the iPad and later with the MacBook to utilize those technologies. I'm not even sure if anytime soon we should expect this kind of two-stack tandem OLED on something like a Pro Display XDR 2 or 3, because I have no idea how those technologies will scale in production on very large displays. While transitioning to OLED, Apple may also ditch the notch in favor of a smaller camera hole. This is why I put a dynamic island concept of a MacBook Pro in my thumbnail. It's described as rounded corner plus hole cut. Could mean anything, could also still be subject to change. I will wait for clarification on that stuff once we have somebody like Ross Young comment on it. It is going to be thinner, which could mean a smaller battery, could also mean a newer battery technology, like a silicon carbon battery, for example, are higher density. So Apple could give you like the same 72 and 100 watt hours, but in a smaller package. Could mean that Apple has a brand new cooling technology to look forward to. It's really hard to say. Could mean that Apple is actually tuning down both cooling and battery size, which would be really, really disappointing. And I really hope they don't go that route. But yeah, we'll have to see how exactly Apple manages to make it thinner. I don't expect them to take away all the new ports or all the old ports that they have returned with the M1 Pro and Max MacBook Pros, the SD card slots, of course MagSafe, of course HDMI, but it's going to be interesting how they fully achieve it. And of course, the main highlight for anybody who's more performance focused, which would be an M6 generation of chips, now powered by TSMC's 2nm technology, which would also power the A20 processor in the iPhone 18 generation. So pretty solid upgrade. Again, we don't have, unfortunately, too many details on it, but it is pretty promising, at least in my opinion. So this is for the large stuff, of course, that we're getting across the sources today. That does not leave us fully without some extra stuff, but I see my time is already running out a little bit. Maybe I have about half an hour or so. But we have a code name for the iOS 19 design, which is really funny. It's called Solarium, which of course refers to where you get brown if you don't want to lie under the sun and you don't want to become orange like certain American presidents. This is very interesting. Does it suggest that it's going to have a glass-like appearance with translucent interfaces? Because a solarium includes a lot of light and it has glass walls that reflect the light on top of you. I have no idea. I honestly couldn't tell you. Is it at least a somewhat promising name? Like if Apple promised, called it like midnight blackness, would it be a little bit less encouraging? Yeah, but honestly, we are just like 2.5 months away from dub at this point. Unless Gurman actually wants to leak images of how iOS 19 looks, and I mean, he did already criticize John Prosser from Front Page Tech in what he leaked, saying basically he either has a very old build to reference from, or he might have actually never seen it. So some fighting words coming there from Mark Gurman. But yeah, I am excited for iOS 19. I hope you are too. But even there, I'm just not gonna like lose my shit over small details like, oh, it's called Solarium internally, right? And speaking of software updates, Apple reportedly wants to replicate your doctor, so I guess I'm out of a job, next year with new Project Mulberry. This is coming from Mark Gurman again, and he says it's promised for iOS 19.4. So basically exactly a year from now, it would come with a revamped health app. It's including Apple Intelligence. Development is now full steam ahead. The update is scheduled for spring or summer of next year, which of course does mean that it could be subject to a delay. And that also brings us the question, would Apple actually announce this feature at Dub and say, oh, it's coming next spring, and risk potentially dealing once again with delay backlash as they now had to deal with this year because of Apple Intelligence powered Siri. Apple's revamped health app will utilize much of the health data that the company already has on you. That's, of course, all data that you put in manually, all the data that your Apple Watch collects, even stuff like now your Power Beats Pro, right, that is, have at least some health data. Reportedly, this new AI agent is being trained on data from Apple-hired physicians. The company is looking to bring in outside doctors to create videos for the new health app. Apple is looking to hire sleep experts, nutritionists, physical therapists, mental health experts, and cardiologists. This is where some rumors come in that this might be a little bit like an Apple Health Plus, right? Like I think about Apple Fitness. The fitness app is of course available to everyone, and that's where you sync all your data from your Apple Watch and stuff like that. It also gives you some like motivation and basic recommendations, but if you want to have like guided fitness workouts with like real pros, that's where you subscribe to Apple Health Plus. And this does sound also a little bit to me like Apple Health Plus, which could be a good addition to Apple One, especially if Apple does not increase the pricing of Apple One, right? I think that Apple One for now is pretty good value. If they add another service, that's definitely going to take it to a higher level, at least in my opinion. Like, quite honestly, just the storage pricing is a little ridiculous. So I would be happy for anything that further improves the value, because I'm not unsubscribing. I cannot. All my family is accessing like my Apple One for like cloud data. We have shared subscriptions and everything in our family plans. Most of us use Apple Music. I've convinced almost everyone to now use Apple TV Plus. My nieces use Apple Arcade. So yeah, plenty of stuff that I still get value from. Getting a new service in there would definitely be cool still. Food tracking will be a huge focus of this app, which of course would kind of create a Sherlock effect once again, where Apple might like just put some calorie tracking apps out of business. But let's see. Supposedly this will work like with AI agents, that they will track your calories. They will then give you like nutrition recommendations. So all of that, of course, greatly depends on how good Project Mulberry actually turns out, how good those AI agents are, and potentially how much of what is going to be happening here might be done by other free services at that point. Because with how much data Google, Gemini, ChatGPT, and stuff like that are able to provide for you, even in their free tiers, I don't know if like a dedicated Health Plus will be such a big hit at that point, right? If it launched like tomorrow and it had a great AI agent and it was specifically focused on these things, I think it would be great. Launching a year from now, to me, it definitely will have its worth, but I don't know what it would mean for the broader community who already have a ton of like calorie and fitness tracking apps and who now have a ton of AI tools as well. So according to Gurman, Apple is also working on features that would tap into the cameras on its devices, such as the one in the back of an iPhone. Thank you. The idea is to let the AI agent study users' workouts and give pointers for improving their technique. This could eventually play into other Apple services, including the existing Fitness Plus platform. I mean, sure, you actually have to consider like Fitness Plus hires like professional gym instructors and stuff like that, and people like that for the workout videos. Apple could conceivably like ingest like an AI generated workout partner for you that demonstrates some stuff. I don't think it would replace those gym instructors, but I think it could Apple potentially help not having to double and triple hire people like those and say, oh, you know what, we're gonna do the rest of the stuff with AI. And to be quite honest, for a service that I don't think is very profitable like Fitness Plus, it's probably a good way to go. Tippermaster, I'm interested in the AI health coach. I thought often about how many years of health data Apple Watch has on me, but doesn't often give actionable insights unless I dig for it, except sleep and very basic stuff. I fully agree. I think that sleep is actually kind of the most worthless stuff, unless you actually have like a sleep-related disease. But for example, your cardiac, is the word cardiac? Like just your health, your heart related age, basically, like how fit you are for your age, how much oxygen you're able to metabolize. I think those are very important statistics for people to know and react upon it. So if Apple has a more like proactive AI agent, that doesn't have to be super AI, even if they just built it algorithmically rather than like LLM based, that still is great. I think a lot of people should know a lot more about their health data. And I don't say that as a doctor, I just say that as a regular guy who wants to be healthy, who wants my family members to be healthy. Tippermaster, I fully agree. Like there's another app I plug into it right now, CardioBot, that uses HRV to estimate recovery days and time, which is neat. Yeah, and we have seen some stuff like that being gradually added to like the Samsung Health app. It's more like a fitness score, which is not quite what I would like to see. I do prefer like a more health focused rather than fitness focused approach. But now that Google, for example, bought Fitbit and is now aggressively trying to push it upon Android users, I actually think that the chance is there for like Google and Samsung to gain a little bit more mind and market share with stuff like their smartwatches if they offer unique advantages, right? I don't see them taking market share away from the Apple Watch. Well, market share, yes, but not overall sales. But I could see them like just make smartwatches a lot more attractive to a lot more Android users. This is something that I've been really interested in, why this phenomenon has happened. And I see a lot more like iPhone users with an Apple Watch than I ever see Samsung users with a Galaxy Watch, and they are the ones that come the closest, right? The most Android watches that I see are Galaxy watches, but then anything beyond that just drops off a cliff. Yes, I see the fitness bands even from companies like Huawei, or at least Xiaomi these days. When Huawei was still relevant in the market, it used to be a pretty big deal. But like, yeah, it's really, really interesting just how like the amount of adoption like per iPhone user of Apple Watches is insane in comparison to the Android market. And I wonder if Apple manages to pull this off before anybody else, and Apple gets actually like an almost unique AI based advantage. Because while I do believe that Google has better LLMs than Apple, Apple has a lot of health data. Apple has a lot of personal health data, which is very important here. Apple has a lot more user trust in that regard. And Apple has great relationships to a lot of leading medical institutions and a lot of universities and things like that. So to me, Apple has a big opportunity here, even though it might not sound that crazy for some people. But all of these things add up, right? From like tracking whether potentially you fell, right? And then immediately calling emergency services, to then potentially tracking whether or not you had a car accident, and all simultaneously while tracking your heart rate, potentially in future generations tracking your heart pressure, your blood pressure. Sorry, that's, I try to translate stuff from German in my head sometimes, and it leads me to say weird shit because I'm really conscious of needing to be more precise with medical stuff, so I get more nervous while talking about it, which is interesting. That's the difference between like a professional perspective that I have on medicine versus my more hobbyist perspective, which I have on technology. Yeah, but I fully understand it, Tippermaster. I agree. This sounds exciting. Now, again, it will depend on how it's implemented. It will depend on how it's priced and whether or not it's priced at all, right? Might be free, who knows? It will also be interesting, like if it's running on device, how much battery life that could eat up and shit like that. But yeah, those are details that we'll have to see once we actually get there. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if at some point, like Apple introduces Apple Intelligence 3 or 2 or whatever, and says these new features are for this subset of products because we are really running, well, they won't explain it, but that will be the reason, but we are really running out of memory on 8 gigabytes devices. So it's going to be 12 gig devices and maybe at some point 16 gig devices that support all those features simultaneously. Now, I don't see this as being exclusive to like an iPhone 17 Pro or anything like that. But once you actually think about the current generation of Apple Intelligence, that's writing tools, that's Genmoji, that's Image Playground, that's notification summaries, that's notification prioritization, that's grouping in the Mail app. Potentially, I would assume it would also improve things like Spotlight search. Of course, we're also expecting new Siri. Then you add new features like this, and you're really at the limit of 8 gigabytes. Now, you won't be running all those models simultaneously, but even if you run sometimes 2 of them, right? Like, let's say you just have your health app open, it gave you a recommendation for a certain workout, or it might have actually even analyzed one of your workout videos using the neural engine and stuff like that. And then you click on Siri and ask Siri something. That's a lot of RAM that's just being swapped back and forth, and it's going to close basically all your background apps and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's the trajectory of Apple Intelligence is very interesting to me. We already see, for example, on the Pixel 9a, how Google had to downgrade certain Gemini on-device functionality for the 8 gigabytes of RAM rather than the 16 that you find on the Pixel 9 and Pixel 9 Pro. So I wonder how that will play out for Apple. Apple is pretty good when it comes to RAM optimization, and they could use a lower accuracy model on older devices. But now that also means that even though you might have Apple Intelligence certified devices, right, but your iPhone 17 Pro might run an LLM that's twice the size as the one you were running on your iPhone 16 Pro. And now you're wondering, why is Siri on the 17 Pro objectively better than it is on the 16 or 15 Pro? So very interesting outlook on the future of Apple Intelligence in terms of actual features and what it means for like which devices will end up getting those features. Of course, I apologize once again for a lot of speculation, but I do try to analyze all these things from a nuanced perspective. sometimes giving you hope, sometimes maybe taking some away. Mark giveth and Mark taketh away, I guess, in that regard. Let's see if there's anything. Okay, so we have Mark Gurman, who had a live Q&A, and he answered a variety of questions about Apple. And including the iOS 19 upcoming brand new design, which they call it. Nice. So major redesign themes include consistency, glass effect, and usability. Mark Gurman has reported several times on iOS 19's new design, but normally only in published Bloomberg works. But a few days ago, he was on a call where he had the unique opportunity to speak more casually about what's coming. According to the official transcript, is it big? It's also behind a paywall. Jesus. Well, I guess. Guys, leave me a donation, a super chat, or a super sticker, and type in that you want me to subscribe to the Power On newsletter. I believe it's $12 a month or something like that. If you want me to subscribe to Mark Gurman so I can react to him more quickly, I guess. So according to at one point, Gurman is asked, you've reported that iOS 19 will feature a major new design. What makes it so significant? Here's what he had to share. The big thing with this redesign is consistent controls, icons, buttons, user interface dynamics, and mechanics across both iOS and macOS. The interfaces between the iPad, the Mac, and the iPhone, they have a lot of similarities, but they have a lot of difference. Things like hamburger menus and menu buttons and the menu bar the menu bar. Is there a possibility that Apple takes away the menu bar for macOS? Jesus, please no. That's what my entire notch is designed around. And buttons for closing applications, the way the dock looks and acts. Oh, this I really look forward to, because I think the dock is fantastic on iPad OS. I know, like some people will be like, what, blah, blah, blah. But like, for one, you have access to your app library. I mean, sure, I could open up Launchpad, but on the iPad, it just feels very consistent with the rest of the OS. You also can drag your app right from the iPad's dock on top of your screen, and that actually opens the app. And it actually arranges the app in a side-by-side multitasking way on your screen, or you use Stage Manager and then it just floats in the air, similar to the Mac. If I were to take one of the icons out from here and put it somewhere on the desktop, they would just disappear from the dock. The dock acting consistently across iOS and macOS has been something I have wanted for a really long time. There are a lot of differences across the operating system, according to Mark Gurman. So it's about adding consistency there. It's about adding glassy effects across the user interface. It's about rejiggering some applications for new generations of users to better understand. This is something... to make it seem more unified between the individual and the devices. This does not sound like a design change. Like, this sounds like just like deep app changes from all the things that Apple has learned. I don't know if it's about making stuff like easier to use one-handed or better in multitasking scenarios. I honestly don't know. So it's going to be a pretty dramatic set of changes. It could take a little bit of getting used to, but I think in the end, people are going to like it. Now, this is interesting coming from Mark Gurman, because Mark Gurman, while he's not an Apple-doomed kind of guy, he does often talk about Apple in hyperbolic negative terms. Like, for example, when he brought up that Alexa Plus is gonna like basically put Apple to shame, and it's not something like, we still don't have anybody having access to test actually Alexa Plus. So when he says he thinks people are gonna like it, that's honestly quite encouraging. He's usually not that positive in a way. In a follow-up, Gurman is then asked if every single Apple app will get the new design. Is it possible that only certain apps will be updated while others remain unchanged? His response was, I can't speak for every app, but I would imagine that with the core applications, you're going to see the UI elements updated to be more akin to visionOS to get the consistency across both platforms. Well, at that point, it's actually 4 platforms, right? It's visionOS, it's macOS, it's iOS, and it's iPadOS. I'm not sure if watchOS and tvOS are getting any big upgrades this year. Doesn't sound like it, but yeah, if Apple updates iOS to be more consistent with visionOS and simultaneously updates macOS to be more consistent with iOS/iPadOS, that's a lot of consistency now. To get this consistent, the glass effects throughout the user interface. Okay, whatever. Finally, he rounds out the iOS 19 focus by emphasizing how significant he expects these changes to be. I think it's going to be the biggest redesign to iOS since iOS 7 over 10 years ago in 2013. So it's going to be quite a bit different, right? That new glass effect, I think, is going to be quite interesting, and I think it's going to look good. I should also mention that I really like this thing that like, I know it's just a render and a prediction, right? Now, I don't like just how translucent they make some stuff because it implies that the actual settings app is fully translucent. But to me, I would really like this. I wouldn't like a full-on one-to-one copy of visionOS, and I've pointed this out multiple times. visionOS is designed around pass-through visuals from your environment. It's designed to have translucency so you actually still feel connected to that environment. It throws shadows on your ground with a floating window and stuff like that. That's not going to be what you're experiencing on iOS and macOS, right, which are on 2D screens right in front of you, not floating in the air, not following you, not part of a visual throughput from cameras. So I hope Apple doesn't go completely overboard with the translucency/transparency design. But what I'm seeing here, I'm liking so far. And what I'm reading here from Mark Gurman, I'm also liking. Now, did I necessarily love what John Prosser showed? No, not thus far. But there is a chance that John, and not a small one in my opinion, especially after Mark Gurman came out to kind of criticize him, I think there's a good chance that he is once again being misled by Apple, and Apple is once again using him to find out who internally the leakers are at Apple. But we'll have to see by the time iOS 19 actually releases. We'll have to see how the refinement period goes. Some of you might have forgotten, but iOS 7 needed actually quite a bit of refinement. Like, some UI elements were a little bit overemphasized, like how translucent the keyboard was, at least in my opinion. And then by iOS 8, Apple changed a lot of that, kept, of course, the basic new flat look, and we have been refining that ever since. We got, of course, widgets, control center and lock screen customization. So there's plenty that was added to iOS over the years, including in terms of design. But yes, this will be a somewhat radical shift if it actually ends up happening. So let's see if that finally brings us to about the end of what we'll have to cover. This is one thing, I don't think I need to cover this for very long. France competition regulator fined Apple $162 million. So I assume it's 150 million euros or something like that. For having basically poorly worded app tracking transparency stuff, right? France's antitrust regulator fined Apple 150 million euros after a lengthy probe into how the technology company asks to collect iOS users' data and the impact on advertisers. This is very important. Apple is being punished here not for being bad to users, but for being bad to advertisers. So I have said time and time again that I disagree with the European Union's, or in this case, a country inside the European Union's regulatory overreach. And I think that this is the first example of not just Apple being like completely overregulated for no good reason, but actually being overregulated in the wrong direction. They did something extremely positive to consumers, made it way easier for consumers to protect their privacy. With that, also, by the way, their security, because the more people own your data, the more likely it gets that your data gets hacked, gets leaked, gets stolen. And France is now punishing them for that. It said that forcing these apps to display multiple pop-ins was making their use excessively complex, which is really not. The regulator said that Apple's ATT framework was neither necessary nor proportionate. It said that the framework itself was not problematic, so at least they are not forcing Apple to close it down. The way it was implemented is abusive within the meaning of competition law. So in a way, they just sucked up to Zuckerberg and Meta rather than Apple, who is actually much, much more pro-consumer in that regard. This is something that's completely unacceptable to me and downright stupid. You can let me know what you think of this, but yeah, I'm not going to be swayed on this anytime soon. I have said time and time again, I think there are smart regulations, smart new laws that could be passed. For one, I think that all multi-billion dollar companies should be paying higher taxes. We should be closing tax loopholes. We should prevent countries like Ireland giving like lucrative tax deals, which then basically take away money from the rest of the European Union. I wouldn't blame Apple for making a deal with a completely legal government. In fact, I would punish the Ireland government rather than Apple for this. And I've also talked about how the App Store deserves regulation. I think that Apple's 30% App Store commission rate is no longer fair. The App Store is so big, so profitable. I think 20% should be the absolute max, maybe 15%. 10% would probably be too low for most cases. And then I think you should reevaluate that every 5 to 10 years, right? I think Apple should also be forced to have independent App Store reviews, which if Apple refuses to put an app on its App Store or forces it to implement certain changes, I think that we need an independent board of directors, let's call them that, or judges that say, oh no, Apple, you don't have the right. This kind of block is not protecting consumers. It's only protecting you, right? And if you really want to avoid any of that, then you just force Apple to adopt full-on site loading, right? Not the kind of, oh, you side load the singular store. No, force Apple to have full-on site loading that's completely optional to the consumer. It has to be manually turned on, right? Force that on them. But what the European Union did with all those side stores, and they force Apple to adopt foreign APIs, and by foreign I mean like third-party companies. Like they even said like, oh, Apple must adopt like alternatives to AirPlay, and I'm like, alternatives to AirPlay aren't even put into competitive technology. Like a lot of TVs out there, they or like a lot of like stereo speaker systems, they have AirPlay, they have Spotify Direct, and they have Bluetooth, right? Nobody bothered to implement some Android specific standard. And I'm like, wait, but what is Apple now? Is Apple now going to be forced to implement Spotify Direct onto their own devices and like the HomePod? It's so weird, and it's so anti-consumer because it literally takes away resources from Apple. And some people will say, oh, but Apple has so much money. money does not buy you instantly like developer competence to create new features, bake them into a pretty mature operating system simultaneously while you try to give users as few bugs as possible, the longest battery life as possible, right? If Apple is constantly forced to adopt bullshit regulations from people who don't know jack about technology, this is not gonna benefit the end consumer in the end. The consumer, if they really want those alternative technologies, would be far better off fully switching over to Android or at least buying a secondary Android device than they would be from Apple trying to retroactively, often years later, implement that shit. Like, have you seen any impact from the site loading stuff in Europe? Like, how many people, and I ask those of you in Europe, how many people do you know who have downloaded like the Epic Game Store on their iPhone, and it even gives out free games, right? Like they're losing money left and right to convince people to switch from the App Store, but it's not happening, just as Windows users aren't switching away from Steam. Yeah, so I know this was a diatribe, I know this was a tangent, but I've seen this news like pop up quickly, and I was like, Jesus Christ, this is so stupid. Let's see if there's anything else that I missed. New Apple TV this year likely to support Wi-Fi 7. Okay. This is coming from Bloomberg's Smart Gurman. Okay. All four iPhone 17 models coming later this year will be equipped with an Apple-designed Wi-Fi 7 chip, according to Apple supply chain analyst Ming-Chi Kuo and Jeff Pu. A new Apple TV is also expected to be released later this year. It will also have an Apple-designed Wi-Fi. Oh, I remember the initial rumor, I believe from Mark Gurman, said that Apple is targeting Wi-Fi 6E for their first generation Wi-Fi modem. But now that we are basically in the know that the iPhone 17 will just get this modem and it will also support Wi-Fi 7, of course it makes sense that the Apple TV and with that maybe a new HomePod as well would actually be powered by this modem and therefore support Wi-Fi 7. This, of course, would be an update over the Wi-Fi 6 technology, so it skips actually Wi-Fi 6E over the Apple TV 4K model from 2022. That's the one that I have. It has a very fast A15 chip. It's very, very good. It's worth noting that Gurman said that the Wi-Fi chip that he reported on would support Wi-Fi 6E at minimum, but it seems unlikely that Apple is developing separate Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7 chips, especially considering that all iPhone 17 models already support Wi-Fi 7 with some limitations. In all, Wi-Fi 7 seems more likely. Yeah, I think that the problem is if Apple creates a Wi-Fi 6E modem, right, I don't think it would be terrible if it launched specifically on like the Apple TV and the HomePod. But ultimately, it's something that Apple expects to be producing years down the line. So why not just maybe wait a little bit longer, refine it a little bit longer, put it on Wi-Fi 7, even if it's not actually that much faster than the maximum download targets that you had for a Wi-Fi 6E modem, and just make sure that it can use the 2.4, 5, and 6 gigahertz bands simultaneously. Now, whenever people talk about it supporting up to 40 gigabits per second, that's purely theoretical. For example, Apple's current Wi-Fi 6E maxes out at 2.4. Very likely that like their Wi-Fi 7 would max out at like 4.8 or something like that. So just trying to tell you, don't orient your opinion on like shit like the theoretical maximums. Those are not often reached. Apple. Okay, I'm not gonna comment to that. I think that that America's FCC is a joke. The people that Trump have installed are terrible. Now SpaceX is basically saying it's bad for Apple to partner with Globalstar. So you know how much SpaceX and Musk care for regular consumers, considering the immense benefits that Apple's satellite emergency services have brought. So they can really kiss my ass. Trump, Musk, whatever idiots they are installing in the highest position of American government, yeah, this is stupid. Apple Watch many years away from non-invasive glucose monitoring. There's nothing to be surprised here about. That's just not an easy technology to solve. Terrible earthquakes in Myanmar and Thailand, Apple donating to them. I've already seen some people try to bitch in the usual way, like, oh, they're not even letting us know how much they're donating. And some American idiots are like, oh, they're donating there, we need money in there. It's like, guys, 2,000 people have died. Like, and that's at the minimum right now. Have some compassion. Apple is a multi-billion dollar company. They can afford to give a few million to poor people in, like, especially in Myanmar, which is nigh destitute with civil wars and conflicts. Jesus Christ. Let's see what people were actually saying. I can't wait to see all the negative companies, all the negative comments. It seems overreported for Thailand. Okay, so somebody didn't like Thailand, I think. Yeah, the comments I wanted to say here are actually a little bit more positive than they usually are. Very often when Apple like announces donations to like relief efforts, people are like fuck those countries and shit like that. Yeah. I've traveled to a lot of places in the world, but have found very few that are more stunning than Burma. Okay. On a completely unrelated topic, looking at that photo, I think that color would make a badass looking MacBook Air. So you see, people thankfully are not focusing on the negatives here, which again, there are no negatives for Apple to give money for people in need. And yeah, people are saying, remember, no good deed goes unpunished. I assume that's a smart, insightful comment that Apple will get shit on in certain circles for giving money. But yeah, just saying, sometimes the Apple community is pretty cool. And I know I've shit a lot on the United States recently. I should say that, and I say that with all my heart. I love the United States. I consider at some point moving to the United States, but it's the current US government that makes my blood boil. It's the Quasimodo eunuch-like a billionaire manservant that is at Trump's side. Those are the people who make me angry. If you're from the United States and you're just a cool guy, join my chat with me. You guys will see how much I love everything that your country has contributed to the world. You can also leave me a super chat like Riveting Tail Chap did, and I'll look really forward to seeing the dollar signs, and maybe you can see them reflected in my eyes like a Donald Duck sketch. Dagobert Duck. Yeah, but like just trying to say, whenever I shit on the US a little bit more frequently recently, and services like Twitter, this is not a general indictment of the United States. I mean, Trump didn't even win 50% of the popular vote. Just saying. I know some people are trying to pretend he won in a landslide, but Trump-Harris popular vote. Just giving you a little bit of like here 49.8%, and yeah, I mean she got 1.5% less. That's totally fair. He deserved to win. He is democratically legitimate, at least for now. I do think he deserves impeachment for several things, but yeah, definitely like definitely situations where I wouldn't call this a landslide. And we're seeing right now in a lot of special elections inside the United States that Republicans are underperforming like crazy because his approval rating is way lower than polls show. Polls really haven't adjusted that young people are now waking up and are really angry, actually at both parties, but that's a different discussion. Yeah, like I know I don't talk too much about politics. Sometimes I do when I had to mention things like tariffs, but this is really situations where because of my emotions that I've shown on Twitter and I will continue to show on stuff like Blue Sky, I really wanted to address this, but it's nothing personal to any American here or anything like that. Yeah, but that's about it for today. We've been streaming for an hour and 15 minutes, which is quite nice. Apple TV Plus, by the way, strong shout out to the Severance finale. Finally had some time to watch that. Was absolutely incredible. So strong recommendations for you guys to check it out. Thank you to anyone who joined today. I know it might be a little bit difficult because with the lack of Twitter, but click the notification bell. That way you know when I'm going live next. Of course, subscribe to the channel. That helps too. Like my videos. The more you like them, the more YouTube knows you actually want to watch them. Comment. The deeper your engagement, the higher your engagement, the more people we attract to this channel, the larger our live streams, the more motivated I am. And of course, share this out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Feel free to still share it out on Twitter. I don't forbid you to stay there. You can also leave super chats and stickers whenever you catch me live. Shout out to Max and Riveting Tail Chap today. You can also become a direct supporter right here on YouTube. Shout out to Max, Angelica, and Steve. And of course, you can become a supporter over on Patreon. So many ways to engage with me, with the community. And if you want to help me grow on Blue Sky and help me grow Blue Sky, then follow me there as well. Thank you so much for everything, guys. As always, let me know what you would like to see me cover next. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.